Okay, we are on section 1.1, and this is part 3 of our stats, our intro to stats work. So we're talking here about analyzing data and some of the potential pitfalls. So misleading conclusions. When forming a conclusion based on statistical analysis, make statements that are clear even to those who have no understanding of statistics or terminology. So we're going to have to put it back into plain old English, right? And that is actually one of the most challenging parts of this, is going from, we've got this raw data, which is we're talking about stuff in English, and then all of a sudden we do all this mathematical stuff, and we come to some conclusions, and then taking that conclusion and putting it back into our everyday English or everyday whatever language, that can be pretty challenging. Okay, so sample data reported instead of actually measured. And here's a perfect example of this. People will go into the place to get their driver's license, and the license asks you to put your height on there, and your height and your weight. So your height, a lot of times people will add a couple of inches to what they actually are. So if you were like, I know somebody who is 5'10" and a half, and he wrote 6 foot, and nobody ever questioned him on it, because the reality is that nobody measured it for him, and he was able to self-report. So there's times that data is less than ideal because people are not being 100% precise. It's also very careful to be aware of loaded questions. Okay, and I'll give you an example for that. There was a senator, and he wanted to, he was pro-life, or pro-choice, and pro-life, and he wanted to make certain that the survey that he asked pushed everybody towards being a pro-life responder. And his survey had, do you believe that babies should be born, or do you think that they should be chopped up and slaughtered, or some, really fairly graphic statement. And regardless of where you fall on the spectrum here, that is not a impartial question. It was very much a loaded question, because if you said anything other than, yes, I want babies to be born, you sounded like a horrible person, and so many people would not respond to that, or would not say that they were okay with that, because it would make them sound really, really awful. Anyway, that is another example of loaded questions. The order of questions can matter. There is something called, drawing a blank on the name, has to do with when you're taking a survey and you happen to be a person of color. The idea that you're being asked this question about your race can set up a kind of anxiety, and it's documented, and I'm not remembering the precise name of it. I think it was, I want to say it was racial something, and it had, like I say, it had to do with the anxiety that gets produced by people wondering what race you are, what gender you are. So sometimes they're unintentionally loaded. Like, it used to be John and Betty all the time. There was never any names of people that were not obviously from, whatever the main culture is. And that in itself can be unintentionally loaded. Okay. Non-response occurs when people decide, nope, they're not gonna answer that question, or the data isn't available. With the first case where they refuse to respond, they found that people who are in lower economic categories, they're not making a ton of money, if they're asked a question on a survey about how much they make, a lot of times they'll choose not to answer. All right, percentages. Some studies cite misleading percentages. 100% of some quantity is all of it, but there's reference made to percentage that exceed 100%. Such references are often not justified. Okay, so be careful about anything where you get more than 100%. That's something you might want to think seriously about. Now, if you wind up with 99.9 or you wind up with 100.1, I would be less concerned about that. That sounds like a rounding error. But if you get something that exceeds 100% or is not, you think you've got everything covered and then you don't have 100% of it, that's something to be aware of. And that's it. All right. Obviously, if you have questions, go ahead and catch up with me. I will see you in class, or I will be available during office hours.